And welcome to the Property and Investor Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Lanfear. And as you know, nothing in the podcast, financial health or legal advice. We have got a very different podcast to you today. I'm really delighted to introduce to you, for the second time to the podcast, Paul Oberschneider. Paul, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Thanks for asking me to join.
It's really good to have you on the podcast. You're doing some really interesting stuff, so I want to get into that later on. I know you've got new projects on the go. For the people that don't know Paul has had like 30 years in the real estate space, starting a pan-European real estate business, basically from the ground up. Lots of peaks, lots of valleys, lots of challenges, lots of successes, and we're going to hear a little bit about that today. So thanks again for coming on the podcast, Paul. I really appreciate it. I often think about the property space.
It's worth
Sorry.
mentioning. It's worth mentioning a few failures too.
Well, we'll get to that. I mean, that's the value, isn't it? I feel like sometimes the property space is a bit like the blind leading the blind, and then you stumble across somebody like you who has really walked those difficult miles. And this is, I think, just such a valuable experience for us all to be here. For those listening to the podcast, what's unusual about this podcast is actually it's done with an audience, and once we've completed the podcast, we'll do a bit of a live Q&A with that audience as part of the breakfast. But Paul, if we kind of get started with like your big picture, okay? So like if we just stand back from all the noise and we look at your big picture kind of macro overview of where the UK economy is, where the real estate market is in the UK, just give us a bit of a download on that. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Oh, okay, that's a lot. I should have read the agenda. So we've been through a very, in my opinion, comes to no one's surprise, very challenging period over the last several years. It started with Brexit. We went through 3 rounds of COVID. The first round was fun. The second round, not so much. The third round, everybody was fed up. 14 consecutive rate hikes, almost from zero, all packed into a very short period of time. A war in Ukraine, which exacerbated the supply chain disruptions already created by COVID as well as Brexit. And here we stand at the edge of the cliff, and everybody kind of wonders what went wrong. Well, you add those dots together and it's kind of easy. And I remember sitting up, 4 years ago at some property conference when I had a viral flu, and I had this chart on the wall, and it showed sort of interest rates dropping from 82 down to where we were presently, and asset prices rising. It was just like one line was going this way and the other line was going that way. And I said, I had a professor in university at one stage that said, you never know when a turn's going to come. It always comes out of the blue. It's never expected, but it does come, and you can only stretch a rubber band so far before it breaks. And that's effectively what's happened is, the rubber band got stretched, everyone got complacent, everybody was making money, and we were all in la la land for God knows how many years. When you think about it, the Dow Jones in 1982 was, as a reference, was 870 points. And it took forever to break 1,000. And here we are at what is it? I don't look at it anymore, 34,000. Mm-hmm. Asset price growth has been phenomenal. And that goes across all asset classes, and real estate being one of them. So am I surprised? No. Could I have been better prepared? Yes, of course. But hindsight capital is always a no losing trade. You think about these things and you think how smart you were, but how much money did you make actually? So I, like everyone else, I'm struggling through this period because I probably wasn't as prepared as I could have been, and that's where we are. Anyway, so where do I think we are? I think we still have a lot of challenges that we're um, having to unwind.
Mhm.
The war is still persisting. You've got a U.S. election, which is just kind of like watching the cartoon series, um, and no one knows what's going to happen there. I'd say it's 50-50. So, and I think whatever happens, you have a big correction in the U.S. market, um, and that's in November. You have Labor, who's just come into office. I'm not going to make any political statements, but I think there are some good positive things that will come out of Labor finally that should have been delivered by the other party. But coming with that is a load of brakes, a load of taxes, a lot of pressure being put on people that are already under pressure. And I don't blame the Bank of England, but I think that they were completely, wrong in their massive rapid rate hike um, exercise, because the inflation, in my opinion, of course, um, the inflation that we experience here is not so much consumer driven and consumer led. I mean, in the U.S., everybody drives a big SUV. They're all borrowing money. They buy big TVs. Nobody gets out of their car. It's just everybody buys lots of stuff. And the U.S. economy is huge. It can self-support itself. It's self-supporting, um, unlike the UK. And so the inflation that we experience in the U.S. is very consumer led. Not so here. It was led by events outside of our control. Um, Gas supply chain lines, delivery from Europe, all these things that through Brexit and other things. So raising rates to slow growth or slow demand or slow demand on things that were already not in demand, in my opinion, was kind of idiotic. But so I think the pressures across the continent are quite different from each other, and the U.S. is zooming, and the UK is just on its knees. Um, these tax credits, there are these tax programs. Um, so you put all that together and shake it in a bag. Um, it scares a lot of people. And whilst I don't agree with, what's happening in the Ukraine, I think sanctioning every single Russian oligarch and anybody with that kind of capital is also a really silly idea, because London was the depository. It was like Liechtenstein. It was, you brought everyone, whether you're French, Italian, Greek, Hungarian, Russian, you move here, you bring your kids to school here, you educate them here, you park your money here, and you live here. And that provides a lot. That and immigration and allowing people to come and work provides a lot of movement and capital flows through the system. You take that away, now you can't find people to wait on tables. You can't get service. Um, Everyone's of a particular race that is in the service business now. They barely speak English, um, and 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 all that money has gone. Um, and if you look at High Street, if you look at the high streets, if you carefully look at the high streets you drive down, I would say 30% of the retail space is empty. And that troubles me a lot, because you have that, and then you have people that are just simply leaving. In the last couple months, I know five people that have left already. They've moved to Spain, they've moved to Italy, they've moved to Switzerland. Now, not everybody can do that, But those people that actually make a difference to our economy, they're either thinking about leaving or they've left or
Mhm.
made other arrangements. That doesn't mean they don't come back to work on that 90-day schedule that allows them to come back, but but nobody's really happy.
Mhm.
So I think as an economy, you've got a long haul here to 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 get back on your feet, and I don't know what that looks like. I really don't know. I really don't know what that looks like. And London's lost its vibe. It doesn't have the same vibe it did 15 years ago. There's just a lot of angry people, but and I say that, I don't say that. I mean, I say that from my where I sit, but you can go into Knightsbridge, and of course, you wouldn't know the difference. I mean, it's that's a bubble. But if you remove London out of the equation and you look at the UK economy, I think your GDP is like the same as Lithuania's.
Mhm.
So you take London out of the equation, and what is there? So I think Labor's got a big job ahead of it. Now, having said all that, what is there to do? Um, we've never met our housing demands, ever. For whatever reason, and there have been books written about this, um, and we're still not meeting them. Construction companies have gone bust. Some of the tier one companies as well. There's going to be less delivery over the next few years because of that. And costs are going to stay high simply because we don't have the labor force to deliver those homes. So getting a plumber in, even here in Chelsea, it takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks. I mean, I might take a plumbing course, seriously, or a dog grooming course because you can't get your dog groomed either. But because no one wants to do those jobs, so you know those costs are going to rise, which means that margins are going to stay thin, which means that land prices have to come down, or investor expectations have to come down. Now, the problem with investor expectations is the vast majority of the capital that comes here for these things, for building, at least in a kind of particular deal size, a lot of that capital comes from the U.S. And right now, I know because I have U.S. LPs, they look at a UK deal and they look at a US deal, and they're making more money on the US deal, and they're at home. So they're slightly reluctant to put capital into the UK and in Europe until things change. So I think we're a little bit on pause. Um, Residential still is my favorite spot because I think, and we can talk about the kind of product that should be and what we're doing there. But there's huge demand, for example, to build new build BTR, low amenity BTR in the UK. I mean, there's something like a demand for 600, 700,000 units over the next couple of years. And that's just a phenomenally big number. I think there also will be space in the retail sector or in the commercial sector. I think that's coming, given the rising vacancy of some of these commercial retail spaces and commercial office units. At some price point, that makes sense. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know where it has to go. You heard about the building in the center of Manhattan that got sold for a pittance. I think one of the insurance companies bought it like 3-4 years ago for a couple $100 million, and they put it at auction. It sold for $8 million. Downtown Manhattan, central New York. I mean, the one bidder. Nobody wants commercial office space. Nobody. So I think that guy that bought it for $8 is going to make a killing. Certainly. But people think in like lemmings. Nobody wants to, do something different. So I think there will be opportunity there. Distress, which everybody talks about, hasn't really hit the market yet, and that's primarily because UK banks like to just keep things kicking down the road. But I think it will come. I know some of the banks we deal with have told me that their books are full of this stuff, and you know, I don't know if you're ever going to get a time like you had in the U.S. during the crisis, the RTC, where the government sets up a program where basically everything gets foreclosed on and sold, which is what happened. But here I think you're going to have banks owning stuff and they don't know what to do with it because the equity's been completely wiped out. The equity holder has no incentive whatsoever to stay in the game. He's desperately trying to not pay his PG differentials. So there's going to be a lot of tension. I know that's not the good news you wanted to hear, but that's kind of where my state of mind is these days.
No, but that's good because that's like, that's coming from a real place. Like that's, you're not doing an advertisement for a particular thing. So you think residential potential build to rent maybe, has some capacity in it. Commercial when the time potentially comes, but obviously we're not seeing the distressed sales. I suppose what's it? And interesting. I know you made it as like as a off the cuff kind of flippant remark, but you talk about like plumbers and dog groomers. There are in markets like this, there are always opportunities, aren't there? So, I mean, you've talked about some of the real estate ones. If you were, if you were like, so I suppose speaking to the audience here, if you were having an opportunity to, I suppose, start again in the landscape that we currently have, what kind of opportunities might you and if we just start with kind of maybe real estate or the industry around it, what kind of things do you think, if you're going from a startup perspective, you would maybe have a look at?
Well, don't laugh, but I'd probably do one of those two things, and make it big, because they're really very, you used to have Pimlico plumbers here. The guy built a really nice business and then he sold it and now he drives around Knightsbridge in his Rolls Royce, but nobody's replaced that guy. The problem is, or create a platform, where you kind of like use the Uber model, and I don't have to know how to be a plumber, but I can have tradesmen trust a trader, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They do the same thing. But I think in those spaces, there's room for that. The problem is that there aren't enough workers out there to do that because they don't need to get on the platform because they're already fully booked 4 or 5 weeks in advance. If you had a big work population where you could actually have all these people on your platform that you can call for jobs, then that would be different. But that doesn't exist. So if you set that up, you might get the business, but it's then executing on that that's difficult. So there's some challenges with that as well. But I'm not sure that, I'm not sure. I probably would start building lots of houses right now. I might be looking to buy stuff at a discount and just be very careful and wait for the right opportunities. Unless I had a cracking site. I mean, real estate's all about location. When the markets are rising, that location philosophy kind of widens. You can kind of go out a bit. But when the market tightens, you've got to be in the center. I mean, you've got to pick the right site. We got a site that came across our desk the other day in the center of Oxford. Now, I used to live in Oxford, and I know how hard it is to get a site in Oxford and planning consent in Oxford. And this site has consent for 18 homes next to the had business school, and I said, you know what? I mean, if we don't do this deal, then we are really stupid, because you those kind of sites, you are one in a million. You know, you can't get those. So I think location, the demographic, you know, who, you know, the market you're trying to hit is really important. And I also see the world. We don't do anything in central London. We've never believed the GDVs here. I think we were probably wrong for a long time, but now we're probably right for a long time. But we do like outside of London, people live, you know, whether it's Blackpool or Liverpool or Yorkshire, you know, or Torquay or wherever, you know, people need to live. They have housing demands. But I focus on affordability. So I have to be able to build it for a certain price in order to pass those price savings on to the end consumer or the end buyer or renter, in order for me to make that work. Or they're just going to sit empty. And I have a lot of empty stuff sitting on my books. You know, people that overbuilt, you know, houses that at the time seemed like good ideas, 800, 900,000 pound homes in the Cotswolds. They're not moving. You know, they're not
I,
moving.
I have to say it's very rare on the podcast or in the breakfast meeting that somebody mentions my hometown of Torquay. I was born in Torquay, and it never gets a mention. So I feel like you've done me a good service there. Um,
Well, I love Torquay.
oh, that's good to
Yeah.
hear.
It's like
Again,
the French.
you rarely hear that sentence.
It's
Um,
it's it's like the French. It's like the secret French Riviera of the UK.
well, that's what it is. It's Torbay. It's the English Riviera, apparently. Um, so that totally resonates, and that is very congruent with a lot of the conversations that we, have in these rooms about, there is the opportunity now, and this is a personal view, is that growing lean, reasonably low debt, um, lifestyle businesses or businesses seems to be a real opportunity. You talk about plumbing, you talk about, the dog grooming, both of those make complete sense. I mean, certainly, the people I know who had roles like plumbers who, for example, worked through COVID, you know, they were then coming to me the year after COVID saying, like, what do I do with all of this money? Because they hadn't spent any money, but they had earned a small fortune through COVID because they never stopped. So let's kind of move the conversation on then, Paul. Onto hard landings. You introduced a really interesting kind of theme into the conversations that we've been having around this whole concept of hard landings. The fact that you had built this pan-European property business from absolutely scratch, and then um, a life-changing kind of moment happened for you. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And do you want to give us your current thinking around hard landings, what that means to you, and what we can learn from that? And I think the context of this conversation is that almost everybody I know is having a reappraisal of their businesses, their lives, things that have worked previously haven't worked. So, yeah, talk to us about hard landings, Paul.
Oh, okay. So before I even start, I just, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody or what. I might talk a little about spirituality, religion, or however you want to put it, but that's part of my journey. So, I started off, I was in Wall Street. I was living quite a crazy lifestyle. I had an addiction problem, and things weren't looking really good. So anyway, I got off that problem through a lot of through recovery program in 1986. So that would make me 39 years clean and sober, from last week basically, and which is a big achievement, and but that really cleaning my head up really put me on a journey that I didn't have any idea was going to happen. I ended up going to grad school, or thinking I was going to grad school, and ended up in Eastern Europe on a short holiday. And and I think people have heard the story before. I landed in Tallinn, Estonia, and I kind of never came home. I built one flat for myself because I was working at a bank. I was helping a guy do a bank thing, and I never moved into the flat. I rented it to the embassy, and then I built another flat. And I thought, oh, that was easy. And I built another flat, and then so fast forward like 19 years, and literally from eating hot dogs on the town square and counting every penny I'd made, I had like $400 in my pocket at the time. I'd built this pan-European investment management firm. We had 35 offices across 7 different countries, and we had institutional partners like Apollo and Heitman and Citigroup, and it was hard work. It was, for years nobody would give us money, but we had the wind to our back. Liquidity was entering all these little small markets, and you could buy something on Monday morning, and the value of that would have risen by Friday. And I'd go to the bank and I'd refinance it, and I'd get money out. So I used the bank like a cash machine to leverage up and continue to leverage up my portfolio. I did that for 18 years, 19 years. So we had an advisory firm called Oberhaus, which was basically a Douglas and Gordon or a Knight Frank. I mean, it was an agency business, but we did commercial and residential, lots of valuations across those markets for all the banks. So we were super well connected in terms of information flow. And having that platform allowed me then to become a developer I was already developing apartments, but I was able to build buildings and multi-purpose buildings and commercial retail, and later on hotels, and across all those markets too. And that business would have never happened had I not had the agency business. And interestingly enough, I see Hilltop very similarly today. Hilltop is my intel machine into the market. Yes, we provide credit. We provide equity-like credit into the market to development sponsors that we back. But equally, it gives me access to the marketplace. And out of that pipeline, it allows me to cherry pick deals with certain sponsors to do them together, where I put the capital stack together. And I probably won't even lend on the deal, but I put the whole capital stack together. And, I might go to Bank of Ireland, I'll get the mezz, I'll get the pref, and I'll get the equity, and I'll package the whole thing up because that's what I know how to do. And because I find a lot of the sponsors don't have all the equity. They may have a consented site, they may have planning, they may be ready to go, but given the way the banks have pulled back, given the way even the alternative credit people like ourselves have pulled back on LTGDVs, more equity is required, and most people don't have it. So depending on the deal size, we're looking to back those kind of deals, but low amenity BTR. That's what we're focused on. So I went to Eastern. I did all that, and I had a great team of people who worked around the clock. They never looked at what time of day it was. Everybody was super well motivated. I gave a lot of people a lot of equity in all the different businesses, which in hindsight I kind of wish I hadn't, but I did. And I have former employees that have more money than I do because they just were smarter. And so in 2007, I was getting lazy. I was coming to the office less and less. I was spending a lot of time in South America. I decided to sell everything, and was very lucky and had a kind of a Forrest Gump moment. And I got super lucky, and I sold everything just before the global financial crisis, and had a big smile on my face, and a big bank account. And I went off for the next, I don't know, 15 years and 16 years and lived a big life, too big. And the result of that was, I had convinced myself that I knew everything and I could always make more. And so I was very careless with the way I managed my finances and certain things. And of course, when you turn off the cash machine, and all those people disappear and you go off the radar into the pampas, people forget you, and getting back on the horse is rather difficult. But I had to do that eventually because I had gone through what was a phenomenal gift from the universe. I basically wasted that. So I went through a very dark period of time over the last many years, trying to, in my head, coming to grips with that, thinking I might end up on a park bench, and that was a scary thought for a guy that, played high-go polo around the world and had staff running around and all kinds of things and all the toys that all these, that kind of person has. And suddenly that was all gone. And slowly, bit by bit, all those assets and toys disappeared. So I had to start again. And, when you start again at my age, that's a scary thought because, I know people that are dying at my age. So my time is limited. So I have to be very careful and very conscious of what I'm doing these days. But that was my hard landing, was coming to grips with the fact that life can throw you some curveballs. Most often we don't expect them, and we can strike out, and it's kind of like what you do next that matters. You can feel sorry for yourself, which I did. You can drink, which I didn't. You can do drugs, which I didn't. You can get buried in gambling or whatever. I mean, whatever short hit dopamine solution that you can find, you can do that. Or you get up in the morning, you put your shoes on, and you go out and you show up. And that's been my philosophy for most of my life, is that I just show up. And if I show up long enough, then probably something will happen. And I have to have that faith, and that belief, that core belief system for that to happen. Because if I don't, then I can't get out of bed and I can't put on those shoes. So I'd say that over the last 39 years, the fundamental belief system in a friendly universe or a God of my choice has allowed me to get through those hard patches, and show up the next day and see what happens. But so that's my hard landing. Everyone's hard landing is going to be different. I mean, some people never experience any of that stuff, but for me, that's my reality.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, people listening to the podcast, if they're experiencing their hard landing, like right now, or they're like bound, or just like, let's assume they've hit their hard landing, what kind of things from a very practical perspective do you think would help people get on their feet? And then a second question, which is, how on earth do people know which direction to go in now? Because there's almost too many things there are too many things available to people on the planet, and my sense is that people struggle with like a sense of direction when these things happen. So one, from a practical perspective, how do you get back on your feet? And two, how do you pick a direction?
Well, that's a good point, because if you're sitting in a room by yourself, you're going to have the same thoughts over and over again. You're not going to think your way out of the problem. And if you're your own advisor, you're probably giving yourself bad advice. Now, the problem is the way we've all been brought up is we go to school and we got to get the right answers. If we raise our hand and we sound stupid, then we feel embarrassed. So, the smart kids are always answering the questions, and the dumb kids like me in the back, we never ask the questions because we're too ashamed. So what I've learned is, you need to ask for help. You need to talk to people. You need a new pair of glasses. You need objectivity. Dispassionate objectivity, I think, is key, because you need to hear the real truth, and you need a different perspective from people in order to then sit back and say, well, okay, that could be possible. And you need a support system to get you through. I mean, and I've only learned that because I'm in a 12-step program, and that's the philosophy of the 12-step program. But I think it applies to all of life. It's that 12-step program is not just for addicts and alcoholics or people with sex addictions or food or whatever. It's for everybody. It's a roadmap of, getting honest, sharing where you are, recognizing that your kind of life is unmanageable in some way, and then and creating an inventory list of all the shit you've got in the background, and having someone help you work through all those problems to give you choices. Because on your own, like if I was just to sit here and try to figure out my life by myself, it would be an impossible task, because I'd be playing the same record over and over again. I would never hear a different piece of music. So, so I think that's how you start, and then how you manage that is you just have to you have to get involved with a wider network of people, and take those actions that people suggest, recommend, people that may have been there or done that or experienced that before. But it really requires reaching out and asking for help. And I find, surprisingly, that the vast majority of people don't do that. They just kind of sit in silence and hope something's going to change. Um, I think it was Katharine Hepburn that said, if you don't row the canoe's not going to move. Um, so, yeah.
I think an aspect of that, just from my own perspective, is that there is this like illusion of separateness, that we think we're separate from each other and from the planet and everything that else is going on. And, people feel like they're a little silo on their own, which doesn't seem to me to be true. And I'd be interested in your perspective on that, having been through the 12 steps, in terms of, you know, be interested to draw on that thread of faith. You talk about faith. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, I mean, in the I don't want this to become a 12-step dialogue, but in the 12 steps, it calls for a higher power. It doesn't say particularly, God can be many things. God, my higher power could be a group of people. It could be an institution. It could be an ideology. As long as it's not me, right, who I think is in control of everything. I have to be able to think that there's someone smarter than me out there. So that's how I sort of perceive the universe as being, a body of people, a body of knowledge out there that is far greater than myself, that can actually help me. And I can only access that if I go out there and try to ask and reach for it. It doesn't have to be a guy in a beard and some cloud. It could be any one of those things that you have a respect for or have faith in. It's like, when you get up in the morning, you hit the switch and the electricity goes on. You don't ever think for a moment that when you hit that switch, your electricity might not come on. or it might come on sometimes. You just assume when you press the button, the light's going to go on. So you've got to have, I think, that kind of rock solid conviction that when you hit the switch and that the light's going to come on. Without that, I wouldn't be able to operate. So that's how I feel about that. And then, of course, we all struggle to change things because we want to be in control of everything. And I heard a phrase once many years ago, and someone said, wrap your head around the concept of surrendering to win. And I thought that was the most stupid thing I'd ever heard. But surrender doesn't mean giving up. It just means there's a whole bunch of shit out in the world that I can't externally change. But what I can change is how I respond to it. And if I just take the action every day and just do what I'm meant to do and then be able to let go of the result, then probably that's a healthier way to live. Because if I'm trying to control people, places, and things and everybody, then I drive myself crazy because everyone's on their own universe, doing their own thing, and I'm trying to interrupt that flow of thought or action, whatever, trying to say, whoa. And that's in relationships too. And I do that all the time. If I don't get what I want, I'm miffed, I'm disappointed, I'm angry, I want this now, but if I can just back off and say, well, actually, it's okay. I just let this go. Get busy doing something else, something positive, then I find that it's easier. Now, that's easier said than done. All this stuff sounds like really simple, simplistic, philosophical, just thought things, but actually trying to do that on a daily basis is extremely difficult because we're all wired to want to be in control.
And then on
It's
the
like
sorry.
it's like that quote that Professor Zinn, which has been around the block a few times. It's like, you can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I love that quote because I can see myself years ago just paddling like hell, trying to like fight the waves, paddling like hell, and whereas actually, let me just wait for the wave. Let me just wait for it. I'll just sit here until it comes. And it might be the third wave, which is always the best wave. And so, yeah.
Look, Paul, you're pushing an open door. You and I could talk surfing analogies until the cows come home, and then I've now got so many of them. But this is I'm going to steer away from that podcast. But that is a beautiful quote. I'm just going to read the quote again. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. I think that is really powerful. Just I suppose bringing things like into more like the physical world, and just I suppose an observation and then a question is obviously I've seen you at the top of mountains and you are objectively like in great shape. In terms of like daily life, how could you give us two or three things that you're doing currently that you think are really contributing to your well-being, staying in shape, staying mentally well, staying physically well? Just give us like two or three things that we can just take away with us.
It's all really simple, and it's the stuff your grandmother told you to do. You get up early, you make your bed, you get dressed, you shower up, get off to work. I exercise every day, whether I like it or not. I do a lot of stretching and Pilates and things. Just to actually just, that's a lie. I just started Pilates, but I do a lot of stretching, and I eat well. My diet is vastly different than what it used to be. I used to be quite heavy, and a bit lethargic. Well, not lethargic, but I got heavy, and I didn't carry it well, and so I'm on a very low carb diet. I stay away from sugars, processed sugars. lots of fruits and vegetables. But these are all things, I mean, you see this on the internet all the time. It's like, but it's right. Lots of protein, more than 70 grams a day. Supplements, yes, of course. No idea if they work or not, but I take them. And I try to sleep early. Now, the problem is that I'm a very terrible sleeper. So that's the one thing that I never get right is, I was wearing this Whoop thing for a while, and I just took it off because the Whoop thing told me I was going to die every day. I hadn't had enough sleep, and so I just got tired of being in the red zone, so I just don't even wear it now. I probably still pay the subscription, but I don't wear it. Because my sleep is not good, and that's something I need to address. But I'm at the doctor 4 times a year, taking bloods, because as you get older, you just don't know what's going to happen. I've had many friends of mine pass away recently. I had a very good friend who was an Olympic swimmer in the U.S., butterfly, and was a swim coach and a mountaineer and adventure guy. And he was kayaking up in Alaska a few months ago. And he came home and he said, I feel really tired. And they took him to the hospital. It turned out he had cancer. But I mean, it was so far progressed. And he died like 4 weeks later. I mean, he went from being this beefy, big, strong, good-looking guy to, I mean, he looked like a skeleton at the end, and he just passed. And so I'm really conscious of time. I'm really conscious of what I put in my body, and I'm really conscious of choices now, because when you're younger, you think it's like you've got all the time in the world, and you do, relatively speaking. I'm 66, and I don't have that luxury anymore. So I'm very conscious about certain things that I may not have been conscious about even 10 years ago. So
very interesting. So then, if we bring things to a bit of a conclusion, the 2 more things I wanted to cover off with you. I mean, obviously, over in your lifetime, you have had a lot of people invest in you, and you have invested in others, both in sort of monetary terms, but obviously, you talked about giving equity to employees. I can see the mentoring that goes on in your world, and with the businesses that you have. So I suppose I've got this question around investability, because it's a question that I get asked a lot, which is at the breakfast meetings, which is, how can a person become investable? So yeah, just interested in your thoughts on that, both in terms of, obviously, from a monetary financial investing in projects point of view, but I suppose also from a wider perspective in terms of having people back their businesses, back them as people. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, the first thing high on my list is I think you always have to do what you say you're going to do. A lot of people say they're going to do stuff, whether it's, I'll call you back, or I'll do this for you, or let's do this. And then it never happens, or it happens very late, or, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just the way people are. But for me, if I say I'm going to be somewhere at 8 o'clock, I'm there. If I say I'm going to do something for you, I do it. So I have a very high level of integrity, just that I try to adhere to, just because I think that I owe it to myself and to others to respect their time. And so I try to do that. The second thing I think is you just need to be very conscious of how you use your time. I was out last night, went to dinner. I was in Mayfair. It was late. And walking past the clubs, and, there are queues of people. They're all a bit pissed, and, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, most of these people, I presume, have to go to work tomorrow at some point. And that was a late night for me as well. But, you know, I'd had a few Diet Cokes, and so I got in the car and went home and went to bed. And I felt pretty good this morning getting on this call. It was getting up at 6. So, you know, they're going to wake up with hangovers, and they're going to be late for work, and they're going to go to work, and they're not going to have a very productive day. I think you need to be really conscious with the choices you make. And, you know, the other thing too is when you're out, people see you, right? People see what you do. An old friend of mine, who I went to military school with, from Texas, you know, we had a bunch of friends, and we had a friend of ours who was having a relationship outside of his marriage. And, you know, I used to travel around a lot as well when I was married, and I was never at home. And people just assume you might have relationships or whatever. And he said, Obi, he said, you know, how can I do a handshake deal with somebody on a business deal if I know that guy's like cheating on his wife? Because how do I know I'm not going to get cheated? If he can do that to his family, how do I know he's not going to do that to me? And that resonated with me. And so I think that I have a pretty high standard on, again, that I place on myself, because if people can't trust, if people can't trust me, they're not going to do business with me. So I'm very conscious of what I do in the outside, and even behind closed doors, because, you know, I don't want to kill that trust, right? And I think you build that up over time. People will, it may not be completely obvious on the front end on day one. Okay, I'm going to act like this or be this way. That takes time. And the one thing that I think I have, so when I started again, the one reason I was, I think, kind of able to raise more money and build our business again, and, you know, get back in, is because people know in the market that they know my story, and they know that I can be trusted. You know, I have a good reputation, and that's all I have. You know, when I walk into a room, I have a good reputation. So.
Excellent. Spot on. That sounds fantastic. And then I suppose bring us to a conclusion. Like, where next, Paul? So what's your direction of travel? What are the opportunities you're looking at? What might be of interest to people? And then we'll talk about how people can connect with you. So I'll put a relevant link in the show notes. But where do you go from here, Paul? Like, what's next?
So we're building our core development lending business still all the time. That's our core business. And we're building a bridging business on the back of that. Not so much traditional bridges, but more development exit bridges. So we're raising capital today, currently, for that. We're also building an equity strategy, which is really working with people that come through my credit pipeline that actually need equity, guys that maybe build stuff or have consented land, but they can't put the cap stack together. They don't know their way around Mayfair or New York. So we do that for them. They become my sort of on-the-ground partner, development partner. We're the GP on the front end. You know, we're doing that with some major institutions on the funding side, high street banks, well-known names for the mezz and the pref, and then we go out and, you know, piece together the equity. So that's a very complex process, but that's a part of the business that I'm particularly focused on right now. And over the next few months should probably get our first deal kicked off, which is going to be 425 low amenity BTR units up in Leeds with you know, an institutional partner called Gray Star on the asset management side. So that's exciting. And then on a personal level, I'm actually launching a platform called Hard Landing, which is going to be a personal and business advisory service. Obviously I'm a busy guy and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to take on a lot of clients or people, but I want to start moving in that direction where I'm doing a bit more advisory work, just sharing some of the knowledge that I've been able to accumulate, like we're having on this chat, from a guy that's kind of been there and done that, and maybe has had the same problems or questions that a lot of people might have. So that's, I'd say, by Christmas that will be launched as well. Beyond that, I don't know. Then there's the dog grooming business.
plumbing and dog grooming next year. And it's great to hear that you're doing some work in Leeds. That is absolutely fantastic. Did you say 425 built to rent? I mean, that's amazing. And obviously that's great news for Leeds as well. Excellent. So if people wanted to kind of reach out with you, connect it to you either on that side or indeed the hard landing side, what would be the best, what link do you want me to put in the show notes? What's the best way of people can
put my email?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
I read all my emails.
Perfect. I shall do that. Well, look, we'll bring things to a bit of a conclusion there. I just want to say, Paul, it's just such such a pleasure talking to you. It always is. You've got such insight. You've got such wisdom. I really value the fact that you are so willing to share the difficult times. Because I think that what we see in this environment is just this highlight reel, often very superficial, and it's you've got so much depth and so much integrity. I feel really privileged that you've joined us today. For those listening to the podcast, they won't realize that Paul had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning for a 7:30 start, and he's a busy guy already. So from a heartfelt thank you, Paul, from myself
thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much, and thanks for listening. And I hope maybe somebody gets one thing out of it. That would be great.
Oh, I have the benefit of being able to see people taking furious notes as you're speaking, so I know they really have. So look, we're gonna leave it there. In terms of rounding off the podcast, I hope this has resonated. I hope this has been useful. I'm going to build out some show notes below that will have Paul's email in it. Obviously, be respectful of Paul's email. If you want to join us on future discussions like this, obviously follow the podcast and follow me on the social media channels. But other than that, it's just to say thank you again to Paul. Thank you very much for listening. Keep well and speak soon.